And then a little later into the 1800s, we get John Cleeves Symmes. And Symmes was the captain of the 1st Infantry for the U.S. military during the War of 1812, which was basically a war between the United States and Britain. Because around this time, the United States was starting to move in on the Native Americans, trying to seize control of the rest of the lands in the Americas that were being occupied by the natives. And of course, the natives were fighting back. So this whole thing turned into one huge war between the U.S. and the natives of America. So the U.S. and Britain go to war, but it doesn't last long. And eventually they sign a peace treaty, and the U.S. and Britain end up joining together, and they both move in and wage war on the natives. And once the natives are removed from these lands, the U.S. and Britain divide ownership of these territories between each other. And again, John Cleeves Symmes captains the 1st Infantry during this war. But then after the war, he's honorably discharged. And not long after this, he starts coming out and just starts claiming that he believes that the earth is hollow and that there are entrances into the earth at both the North and the South Poles. And he was relentlessly campaigning this idea to the point where he actually sent out a declaration of his belief that the earth was hollow to every single college, every single government official, every prominent scientist. And he had this thing printed in every single national newspaper. And he even had a certificate attached to this thing professing his sanity, like basically letting people know I am sane and I really do believe this. And in this declaration, he said he believed that within the earth were these solid concentric shells, just like Edmund Halley suggested. And again, that you could get in through the North and the South Pole. And he literally said he pledged his life to this idea and that he was ready to go explore the inside of the earth. And he already had a whole expedition mapped out. He was asking for like 100 people to join him, that they would start in Siberia in the fall and then head toward the poles. And he believed that in the poles, they were going to find warm, rich land with vegetation and animals, possibly even human life. And he was so determined to make this thing happen that he actually petitioned Congress for funding to start this expedition. And here's the thing, his father was a judge and his uncle was a member of the U.S. House of Representatives. So he was actually able to get the vice president at the time to present this idea to the Senate. So the idea for this expedition was put on the Senate floor 3 times. And all 3 times it was shot down until the actual president of the United States at the time, John Quincy Adams, actually agreed to fund this expedition. But this was during the last year of his term as president. And before the expedition can actually be put into action, John Quincy Adams is voted out of office. And when the new president, Andrew Jackson, is brought in, the funding for this expedition is completely scrapped. And Symmes ends up passing away in 1829, literally 2 months after John Quincy Adams is voted out as president. But this guy named Jeremiah Reynolds, basically his right-hand man, continues walking in Symmes' footsteps, pushing and campaigning for this expedition. And eventually the Senate is like, look, we will fund this expedition. But in order for us to fund it, we need you to remove all of the hollow earth aspects. This will be an expedition to explore the polar regions. There's not going to be some talk about hollow earth or, giant holes located at the poles. This is strictly a polar region expedition. So ultimately they approved this expedition to go explore the polar regions, but they actually do not include Reynolds. They tell Reynolds, we appreciate you pushing for this expedition, but your services are no longer needed. So in 1838, the U.S. military sets out on what they call the United States Exploring Expedition with over 490 naval officers and over 6 first-rate warships. And this expedition lasted 4 years. And once this expedition is done, they don't report seeing any openings at the poles, anything dealing with Earth being hollow or anything like that. But they do report the very first definitive sighting of Antarctica. And that we can solidly confirm that within the southern polar region, there is an icy continent. But again, even the best naval ships at the time could not handle that terrain. Again, we still didn't have highly advanced enough icebreaker ships at this point in history. So they could confirm that the continent was there, but they couldn't actually enter it. And they never even made it to the North Pole. And of course, Symmes, the person that was originally pushing to make this happen, doesn't even live to see it. But he is buried with full military honors. And right after his burial, his son actually pushes to have a monument built around his grave. And since 1829, this monument has been sitting in Hamilton, Ohio, in what is now known as Symmes Park. Literally, the entire park is named after John Cleeves Symmes. They even named the road that the park is located on after Symmes. And it used to be a cemetery, but every single body was removed except Symmes. Symmes is the only grave left on this site. It is literally one of the oldest public memorials in the United States, and it's located right in the center of the park. And they're serious about keeping this thing up because in 1991, they performed a $16,000 renovation on this memorial. So people were really fascinated with Symmes and this whole idea of a hollow earth. And you have to question, with Symmes being so involved with the invasion and occupation of those native lands, did he hear something or see something that caused him to really believe that there's something major going on at the poles? But this thing really started to catch people's attention. Now, we don't know exactly what they found out there, but whatever they found was obviously significant. And all we can really do is look at the timeline because it's interesting. Operation High Jump ends in February of 1947. Then 5 months later, in July of 1947, we get the supposed Roswell UFO crash. And then we start seeing this large uptick in UFO sightings all over the country. Same exact year, just 5 months apart. And also in this same year, in 1947, they end up placing a model of John Cleeves Symmes' hollow earth concept in the Museum for the Academy of Natural Sciences. And to this day, it is still in this museum, along with a lot of his research papers and different documentation connected to Symmes and this concept. But again, it is placed in this museum the exact same year as High Jump.